What is up, sports fans? What is up, Seattle Mariners fans? Wow, I cannot believe it, but we are just over a week away from the start of the regular season, about a week and a half or so as I tape this episode Monday, March 17th. Man, I love spring training every year, always get excited for it, but just seems to go by kind of fast. Now we're right here. We're almost to the regular season, and it's kind of to the point where we're getting some storylines about some of the roster crunches and who's going to end up in those final spots for the Seattle Mariners on the roster. I think we need to talk about that. I think there's some big battles going on here in camp, and there's one guy in particular who wasn't with Seattle until just after the start of camp, but he's making a huge impact, making fans wonder if he's going to be mashing home runs at T-Mobile Park. That player is one Rowdy Tellez. That's right, the hefty lefty for 2025 for the Seattle Mariners, at least possibly. Will he surprise everybody and be the starting designated hitter on opening day? Will that happen? Well, we'll try to get into it here on this latest episode. Welcome on in to the latest episode of Bleav In Mariners. I'm Jordon Schultz, more affectionately known as Schultzy, a Pacific Northwest talk show host based in Portland, Oregon. Work at 1080 The Fan for Honesty normally, but love to do this podcast on the side, and been following all these questions about the Mariners in spring training. I'm a diehard Mariners fan, have been so since a kid, and this roster spot in particular is actually probably the biggest question remaining for Seattle after basically now deciding, at least hearing, you can kind of read between the tea leaves from Dan Wilson and hearing from other members of the Mariners media and staff that Ryan Bliss is most likely going to be the starter. Love that. Still need to do an episode of why I think he is going to soar for the Mariners this year. But who's going to fill this final roster spot? But really more importantly, will it be this hefty lefty Rowdy Tellez that we've kind of been blessed with, in my opinion, for the Mariners on opening day? So let's dive into how well Tellez has been playing, and I do need to take a minute specifically just to marvel at the Mariners having a guy that can actually hit moonshot home runs again. It's kind of nice. I know it's definitely something that's, not necessarily going to win you games. It's more of a nice thing to watch. Like the chicks dig the long ball, right? Like the girls love to watch the home runs. Actually, fans love to watch the home runs, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win. But I do believe that some power at the designated hitter position is something, and I don't think it's just me believing this. We all know that the Mariners have been lacking at the designated hitter position basically since Nelson Cruz left Seattle, 6+ years ago. So seeing some actual legitimate major league talent and the ability to hit from the left side of the plate and hit it way over that fence, maybe off the Hit It Here Cafe in T-Mobile Park. It's got me a little excited. So we got to take a minute. He's hit 3 homers, one of his first plate appearances for the Mariners when he arrived in spring training was a 432-foot freaking moonshot. It was just like, wow, Rowdy's here. Cannot believe it. He was a guy that weren't really talking about before spring training, but yeah, he's been doing so well. Almost 300 average so far through spring training, 297. He's got 11 hits, 7 runs scored, 3 home runs total, including one over the weekend before taping this podcast, as well as 4 RBIs. So seeing some pretty great production, and I would say good, consistent production throughout the entire spring. It's it's hard to get excited about a dude that comes in, hits 3 home runs, and then kind of tails off a little bit. We kind of saw Dominic Canzone, for instance, starting the spring, hitting the ball really well, and then kind of tailed off a bit. His average has not necessarily looked great since the first week or two of spring, but that has not happened with Rowdy Tellez. He's once again hitting, I would say, way above what the Mariners expected him to do at, 297. I know that he's actually had a couple of good seasons. If you look back at his stats in 2020 in Toronto, the pandemic shortened season, he did have a nice little 283. So in a short sample size, he can go on a run for you. He actually hit 243 in Pittsburgh last year in 132 games and almost 400 at bats. So he's definitely competent. And then 242 average in 2021 playing with Milwaukee and Toronto combined. And I just love to see a guy that once again, instead of hoping, that this presence on World Series winning team, for instance, in the likes of Mitch Garver, hoping that one person is going to fix your offense. Like, I do like kind of taking a chance on somebody that's trying to prove something here, that maybe feels like he got a little stiffed by Pittsburgh after getting released. What was it? I think like late September or late October. They just kind of moved on from him. And in that time, actually, Tellez identified that he really wanted to be with Seattle. So pretty cool seeing it work out. At least happy that he's been hitting well. But he's only 29 as well, or actually just turned 29 on March 16th. He had 13 home runs in each of the past 2 seasons, looking a little bit more at his stats with the Brewers in 23 and then last season with Pittsburgh. And one thing I like to look at, because T-Mobile Park is a doubles stadium, I like to look at the doubles. And he had 23 doubles in 2022, only 9 in 2023. Definitely looked like a down year for Rowdy, but that was because of a finger injury here, according to one of his interviews with, I Bleav it was either Ryan Divish or I want to say somebody with MLB.com for the Mariners. Basically, that year suffered like a finger injury, shagging fly balls or something before a game. Never really healed after that, and had, I think, 12 homers up to that point in the season. And for the rest of the year, in like 80 or 90 games, he only had like 1 homer. So yeah, obviously that 2023 year, apparently a finger injury kept Rowdy Tellez down. So only 9 doubles, but then 18 doubles in 2024 last year for Pittsburgh. So he obviously can hit it in the gap as well. That's something I really like to see Mariners hitters be able to do, something that they really have to do. But Tellez obviously way removed from that finger surgery, way removed from any injuries that he felt might have kept him from repeating that 2022 season with Milwaukee, in which he hit 35 home runs and 89 RBIs, pretty similar to maybe like a Daniel Vogelbach season, all-star year. He had a really crappy second half of the year, but at least Vogelbach hit near 30 homers and was actually giving the Mariners some good at-bats to start the season, and that's something that they haven't had. So I'll take it. Honestly, even if Tellez fall off in the second half of the year, I'll take it. I want him on the opening day roster at this point, even though I don't think that's going to happen. I think he is going to be, if he does make the Mariners roster, he's going to be a great player for them, and I think he's probably going to be their DH the entire season. That classic combo of left-handed power along with that veteran presence, it makes him the perfect addition, in my opinion anyways. I mean, he can split time with Luke Raley at first. He can split time at designated hitter with Raley and Donovan Solano. I still can't believe that the Mariners, I know Solano's a good hitter, but they're putting a little 5'8" infielder essentially at DH, and I don't like to see that. I like to see some power at the designated hitter spot. That's usually where you've got it in the lineup, and Rowdy obviously fits that bill. So I love that. And since they didn't sign Justin Turner, Rowdy, with that veteran presence, with some experience in the playoffs, he's actually made it 3 times to the playoffs in his 7-year career, twice with the Brewers and once with the Toronto Blue Jays. He can kind of make up, for that presence that Justin Turner kind of it doesn't bring back. It's frustrating that the Mariners basically tried to reach out to him, but once again, put it all on him, saying, hey, Justin, you're the only guy we're going to bring back. We want to give you like $7-8 million, but we're going to put it all on you. He said, no, thank you. But turning to a guy that needs to prove something, that's kind of feeling a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, like Rowdy Tellez, after being released by Pittsburgh after what I'd say is a pretty decent season. It's not great, but that's an above average season. I know that he doesn't offer much defensively, and then so when you look at like his WAR, I think he had like a minus 0.6 WAR last year, so he wasn't good in the field. He wasn't great for looking at like the wins above replacement stat, but he at least fills up your lineup with a guy that will actually give you decent at bats and professional at bats. So I think that, along with the veteran presence and that hefty lefty power presence, I think that he would be a great addition in the Mariners locker room. And I think he expects to get to the playoffs with this Seattle Mariners team. Actually, hearing a couple of those interviews that Rowdy's done with the Mariners media, likes being here, likes the team. He thinks it's a great place to play, a fun place to play, and he's feeling better than ever. And he thinks that he can have a 30 home run season again. Can he? Honestly, I'll be happy with a 15 home run season for him. I'd be happy with like a Mike Ford like season for him after the Mariners basically went, what was it, like we're giving our DH, this was I think in 2022, right, when they gave their DH, or 2023, excuse me, they gave their DH just basically as the off day guy that was going to be in the field. So they really only have like 7 or 8 batters. They still didn't fill up the lineup until they brought Mike Ford up, and he actually provided, shockingly, a consistent presence at the designated hitter position. That's all I expected. That's all I would hope for from Rowdy Tellez. And it is worth mentioning that they do have a deadline on the Rowdy Tellez decision, and we'll talk about a couple of the other guys that are fighting for roster spots here in just a second. But this is one reason, obviously, on top of the production and how much the designated hitter spot or first base, you could put Luke Raley in there, kind of take him out with Rowdy Tellez, switch them out, throw Donovan Solano in at first if you wanted to. But essentially, with Rowdy in that mix, I do feel like they're a lot better. But it's worth mentioning, and it's a big decision to make, frankly. It's worth mentioning that it is also a big decision to make because they have a deadline on Rowdy. He's got an opt-out on, this is Sunday the 23rd, looking at this article here. So they have to make a decision to keep Rowdy Tellez by then. If not, he will be allowed to seek other opportunities if he wants. But, man, that team leader aspect, if he is guaranteed a roster spot, he would make $1.5 million. It's kind of sad that we're talking about that possibly being a part of a budget crunch for Seattle because they've already spent, like $11 million? I think $10.5 million technically is what they've spent just on the dotted line for Solano and Polanco. You add another $1.5 million to that. Oh, that might take away their ability to spend at the trade deadline, which sucks. But I think that $1.5 million, that would be a steal for veteran experience in the clubhouse, playoff experience, and a guy that can hit whammies for you. Get him in here yesterday. So you've heard my case on Rowdy Tellez making the roster, but there are guys that are playing really well other than Rowdy Tellez. Miles Mastrobuoni, he's been playing very good, .429 batting average so far for Seattle, 4 RBIs, an over 1 OPS this spring. You got Dom Canzone, who kind of had a good start to the spring. Ryan Bliss also been in the running for a roster spot, essentially guaranteeing himself starting at second base. At least that's what we're hearing, or seems to be the plan from manager Dan Wilson. And essentially with Ryan Bliss at second, that kind of opens up a little bit of an opportunity for maybe a Miles Mastrobuoni, right? Or at least it did until Rowdy Tellez showed up. You got Donovan Solano, who's going to platoon. I mean, so if you look at like the bench and the roster makeup, do they even have any roster spots left if they go with Rowdy Tellez on opening day? 2 of those bench spots go to the Mitches. Another's going to go to Dylan Moore. That's essentially 1 roster spot depending on if Rowdy Tellez makes the roster. If he does make the roster, then you literally don't have any roster spots for Mastro. You've got Garver, Haniger, Solano, and Dylan Moore as your utility guy on the bench, and Garver acting basically as a backup catcher. And we'll talk about that here in just a second and kind of how that affects the roster. But, with Tellez making this huge case, it makes it a bit harder for a guy like Miles Mastrobuoni, even hitting his booty off to make the roster. So you look at, Mitch is guaranteed, at least at some point during the season. Mitch Haniger might start the season on the IL. We'll talk about that as well here in just a second. But you're looking at the Mitches filling up 2 spots on the bench. You've got another going to Dylan Moore, and then Donovan Solano if Rowdy makes the final roster for the Mariners on opening day. So, I mean, like maybe the Mariners could add an extra bench guy if they didn't want to carry 9 bullpen pitchers. I know that Dan Wilson might not manage exactly like Scott Service. Service, when the roster was expanded to 26, always liked to carry an extra bullpen arm, never liked to carry an extra position player unless there were like a matchups or he just had a lot of players in the bullpen that were injured, or it was like a opportunity where they could skip a guy in the rotation so they could have a player around, for a couple of extra games or something like that. Service just didn't like to do that on the regular. We'll see if Danny does that any differently. But ultimately, who do you think is going to be in the Mariners dugout on opening day? I mean, do they want to sacrifice a bit of speed off the bench and put that power in the lineup like I think they should with Rowdy Tellez? Or do you want more versatility, maybe with like a second utility guy? He's a bench outfielder. Maybe that can give you some speed or some pop in a guy like Mastro or a guy like Dominic Canzone. I do see positives with all these options here, but I mean, if you look at the guys that are available, essentially it comes down to, with Bliss making the Mariners roster as the starting second baseman, pushing Dylan Moore to the utility role. I mean, essentially it's down to Mastro, Rowdy Tellez, maybe a Dominic Canzone is in there, as well as like, I mean, maybe they're still considering Blake Hunt and carrying a third catcher on the roster, but I'm not sure that they would want to sacrifice a roster spot, even like after having to keep Mitch Haniger on the roster as an overpaid, bloated fifth outfielder, essentially just making too much money and there because the Mariners are too cheap to get rid of him. But I do see the positives in a Canzone. I do see the positives in a Mastro, but I look at like Miles Mastrobuoni and I found something in his spring training stats. I know that every Mariners fan is excited about Miles Mastro's spring training. He's been hitting his booty off, but I don't think that Miles will hit his weight come the regular season, guys. He's a 2022 when he came up with Tampa Bay for a cup of coffee, hit 188 in 61 games with the Cubs. In 2023, he hit 241, and in 50 games last season with the Cubbies, he hit 194, and he's only hit one homer. So he's obviously kind of the lighter bat guy. He's more of the glove guy. I don't really think the Mariners need another glove guy. They've already got Dylan Moore. They've already got J.P. Crawford, former Gold Glove winner at shortstop. They've already got Ryan Bliss, a really good young defensive second baseman. I just frankly don't think Mastrobuoni is going to help them much if Dylan Moore is already on the roster. And when you look at, yeah, everyone's freaking out. Oh my gosh, he's hitting so well in spring training. When you look at his other spring training seasons, yeah, he hit pretty well leading up to his time in Seattle in 2025. You go back even like to Tampa in 2022 when he had his debut, 333. 23 for the Chicago Cubs. He hit 350 in spring training. 2024 for the Chicago Cubs. He hit 286. Yes, he's hitting over 400, but guys, we're talking about like a hit or two difference over like a 350 or a 333 batting average. We're talking about small sample sizes in spring training. It's not that much. And when I see a stat line like that every spring training for Miles Mastrobuoni, and then I look at the regular season and I see how anemic a guy like that at the plate is, it just tells me, nope, he's a spring training hitter only. There's no way that that's going to translate to the regular season. And I've said it here on this podcast, and I'll say it again. I will be so upset if the Mariners give one at-bat to Miles Mastrobuoni this season. Now, they might be forced into it here because, I don't know, what do you give that spot to Leo Rivas if you don't give it to Miles? I mean, that gives you less versatility, right? He can only play a couple of positions. He may have a little bit better of a bat. So that might be something that Seattle wants to go with. But Leo Rivas sort of in the mix, hasn't really played well enough through the spring this season to actually warrant some consideration. But essentially, too, with this roster crunch, Mitch Garver serves as the backup catcher. And that could crunch the roster even more if, say, Seattle wants to play Garver and Garver and Cal Raleigh. I just get confused with the Mitches. But when you want to play your catcher, your starter, and Cal Raleigh, and then your backup and Mitch Garver throwing him in a designated hitter because he's got a good matchup or he's playing well, it's going to be even more of a roster crunch for Seattle. They've got Blake Hunt on the 40-man, but after seeing crappy production from backups in past seasons, like Luis Torrens was okay, but I know defensively he wasn't great behind the dish. Sebi Zavala was just horrible. I still have nightmares about like Tuffy Ghost Switch, like just the rando guys that the Mariners have thrown behind the plate as a backup. I'm willing to take the chance of having Garver as the only backup catcher on the roster. He's played really well in spring. It looks like he's got the production up, and I think it's fine if the Mariners can take that risk maybe once a week, possibly like every other week, maybe twice a week, or maybe once a month or something like that. But you can't do it more than that. But the Mariners need hitters, all right? And it's a risk here carrying, a backup catcher that could fit in as a designated hitter at some point. But what else can you do if guys are succeeding? And I mean, if you already have a roster crunch, what are you going to call Blake Hunt up and take, at that point, I guess you could take either Haniger or Miles off the roster and just carry, two catchers. And then Garver goes back to like being a designated hitter. I guess that would be a great problem for the Mariners to have if Garver was hitting 15 home runs. So I guess I can't complain, but they're still going to play Cal Raleigh. And if Garver's hitting, they're going to say, oh, Cal Raleigh, we want to give him, a little bit of time off. But come late in the season, especially after winning that platinum glove last year, do you really think that they're going to be able to take him out? No, he's going to want to be in for one. And the Mariners, frankly, are going to need him in there. And then you look at the other Mitch. Can Mitch Haniger make a difference? Basically, as an expensive fifth outfielder that kind of unfortunately, you're forced to keep because of your cheap mindset. It's been a decent spring for Mitch when he's played. He talked about being much healthier a little bit earlier in the spring, but after saying that, he's essentially been sitting since March 8th, is what this article says, because of his sore shoulder. And if you look at the roster as a whole, Rayleigh's presence as that fourth outfielder when he's not playing first base or designated hitter, outside of like a few spot chances in the outfield, kind of like a fifth outfielder opportunity, there's really only at bats available for Mitch Haniger as a DH, basically against lefties. And I know that they're kind of forced to keep him because he's so expensive, but maybe they could start him on the IL if his shoulder's still not doing well, to push off a potential roster crunch, maybe give a little bit more versatility to Dan Wilson, maybe get a guy like Mastro on the bench. Maybe they could start Mitch Haniger on the IL, but if they don't, in my mind, the lineup that you're seeing that the Mariners threw out on, this was Monday the 17th, the day that I'm taping this, against the Athletics, at least that they threw out before Julio got taken out. He was initially in the starting lineup, wasn't feeling well against the A's, so they kind of changed it up. But that initial lineup is the one that I think that you should be playing back in Seattle on opening day on the 27th of March. Victor Robles to lead you off. Julio Rodriguez in center, batting second. And Robles, of course, is in right field. Cal Raleigh catching at third. Oroza Reyna in left, batting fourth. Luke Raley at first, batting fifth. Jorge Polanco, he is at third, batting sixth. Rowdy Tellez, designated hitter, batting seventh. Ryan Bliss, second baseman, batting eighth. And J.P. Crawford, shortstop, batting ninth. So basically, with that starting lineup, essentially you're looking at Garver, Haniger, Solano, and Dylan Moore on the bench, who, along with the starting of Ryan Bliss at second base, essentially forces Mastro down to the minors. But I think this is the best roster that the Mariners could have put out there, considering how cheap that they're acting. Frankly, I actually kind of like the look of the roster with Rowdy Tellez on it a lot better than I do without it, and I think they'd be stupid not to keep him and to give him some at-bats to start the regular season. And like I said, they could push it off with Mitch Haniger if they don't want him on the roster, or he's not necessarily healthy. And you know what? They're still kind of forced into paying him because they're so cheap, but they can maybe keep that roster spot open. They could keep a Miles Mastrobuoni on the roster. They could keep a Dominic Canzone. They could keep one of their young kids or put Leo Rivas in as like a late game defensive replacement. Like, keep somebody else around and maybe give yourselves a little more versatility until Haniger gets healthier and you're forced into a situation with him. Rowdy Tellez, though, to wrap this up about Rowdy, he wasn't really being uttered by Mariners fans. His name was not before spring training. So essentially his impact, it's like a huge bonus, right? Or I guess a potential bonus of sorts. I'm rooting for Mike Ford 2025, all right? Or maybe a Daniel Vogelbach season to wrap this up once again, because what else do we have to hope for from this kind of front office, man? These are the chances that they take. These are the dice that they roll. It's the 1 cent buy-in. It's not the $100 buy-in. But hey, the Mariners might get really, really lucky with this 1 cent buy-in, and especially lucky with a guy that really wants to be here and seems like he's healthy. And I, frankly, am once again excited that the designated hitter spot will actually hopefully have somebody with Tellez that can hit this year. And that's going to do it for this episode of Bleav in Mariners. The roster crunch definitely getting down to the wire, but I think Rowdy Tellez is going to start at first for Seattle. Please let me know what you think. I'm on X, on the air, Jordan with an O. Also on our YouTube channel, Bleav in Mariners. Let me know with a comment in this video. And if you're watching on YouTube, would really appreciate a like and a subscribe. And by the way, we are getting closer. We're at 77 subscribers right now, trying to get to 100 subscribers on YouTube. When I do, I'm going to give away this 2019 Andres Munoz Topps Chrome rookie autograph card. I know a Mariners fan out there would love that. And once I hit 100 5-star ratings on Apple Podcasts, I've got a beautiful 2019 Topps Transcendent Edgar Martinez autograph number to 25 to give away to a die-hard Mariners fan. We'll be out there having some fun, probably doing a live stream to give that away. Would love to meet some of the fellow community out there and just get out amongst the fans. That's why I'm doing this podcast. But appreciate everybody. We'll still be talking about why Ryan Bliss is going to be successful at second base. And also, I know we're talking a lot about the bullpen and some crunches for spots there. Go listen to a recent episode I had on Bleav in Mariners about what bullpen spots would be available and who the guys that would fill those would be, it looks like we're actually going to have to go a little bit deeper than expected. And maybe a guy like Carlos Vargas is going to be on the opening day roster for the Mariners in the bullpen. So we'll get into that here soon on Bleav in Mariners as well. Appreciate everybody tuning in, but make sure that you stay safe out there and keep your tridents up. See you soon.